Rebellious Studio presents the Mind Body Podcast with your host, Maria Angelova. Hi, Rebels, and welcome to the Mind Body Podcast, your rebellious podcast with me, your host, Maria, where it is all about a strong body, calm mind, healing, and fully living. And today I have the privilege to have as my guest, Dr. Jacob Hascalovici. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Very good. I'm impressed.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Jacob, let's dive right in. You have a fascinating background. What you do is fascinating, totally down the alley of my nerdy self. But before we get there, let's first by starting and introducing yourself with 3 words and a little bit of a backstory behind each one of them of who you are. Who is Dr. Jacob?
Sounds very good. So I'm a neurologist by training. And I'm also an interventional pain management specialist. I started my career at a large hospital in New York City, Montefiore. I did all my training there, and I spent several years there working on faculty, and then eventually branched off from the hospital to work in a virtual clinic where I treat people who suffer from chronic pain across the United States using telehealth and telemedicine.
Mm-hmm.
3 words to describe me, I would say hardworking, empathic, and also passionate. I believe very strongly that the keys to success in general always have to start from hard work. Even the people who make success look easy, hard work is always a part of that. I think empathy is important just as a human quality. This is especially true in the field of chronic pain management. And passionate, I think in order to try to solve big problems, you really need to be passionate about those problems.
Yeah. And I have found, tell me if you can relate to that passion makes working hard easier. Because when you're passionate about something and excited and eager about something, it doesn't feel as if you're working so hard or so long.
That's right. You just reminded me of a book I read recently called Happier by a famous author from Harvard, Tal Ben-Shahar. He runs the, I think, most popular course in Harvard, in the history of Harvard, on happiness. One of the things that he mentioned is that there's sort of 3 different types of occupation. There's a job, 9 to 5. You regret going to it and you can't wait for it to end. There's a career where we're trying to climb a ladder to reach the next step in our career. And then there is a passion, and there's a calling, rather. And this is the type of work that you were really born to do. And waking up in the morning and going to work, it just doesn't feel like work. And that's really that's really passion, if I think about it.
I can very much relate to that because my transition from the corporate world into what I do now is a very non-traditional transition. However, like you said, I get up excited of what am I going to discover in the body? What am I going to learn? How am I going to interact with the client? And I'm fascinated by the human body and the way it functions, mind, body, spirit all together, and how the world around us influences us. And I'm just really a nerdy, passionate geek around that. And I sometimes I work long hours, but it doesn't feel like work because I just love it.
Yeah, I think I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. And you and I connected on the topic of pain, which is a topic I'll tell you I'm very passionate about because since I've started my journey, I've been in the fitness world for almost 30 years. But when I started with Pilates, I started dealing with a lot of people with chronic pain, assisting people rehabilitate. And I started observing very interesting things about pain. And we talked about some of that before we started recording. But I found out that pain is first of all, multidimensional, that pain has definitely a mindset impact on people because they dread the pain. And I'm also fascinated by how healing movement is for pain. So I know I said a lot of things, but thoughts around any of those?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. Maybe we can take them one at a time.
Let's do that.
So I think the first thing you said was that you're very passionate about pain. So am I. And just to be clear, when I talk about pain, I'm talking about chronic pain, and that's different than acute pain. The difference being that acute pain is the symptom that our body experiences after an injury, typically. That is the type of pain that we expect the body to heal on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Now, chronic pain, and this usually happens within a few weeks, at some point under sort of an arbitrary time period of about 3 months. What I'm passionate about, and of course that's a very important part of pain, and but where my sort of expertise and passion really come in is on chronic pain. And this is pain that doesn't seem to be getting better or going away beyond the time period which we would expect the body to actually heal itself. So that is the type of pain that I've actually devoted my entire career to working on and helping people get through, and ultimately, work with people to help them find ways to live better and feel better. And why the reason I think this is important is because when we're dealing with chronic pain, it's similar to dealing with other chronic illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
There may not be an end in sight to the actual symptoms. So think about diabetes, right? If you have diabetes, there's no cure for diabetes. And so there may not be a cure for chronic pain in the same way that there isn't a cure for diabetes. But it doesn't mean you need to live with pain for the rest of your life. And it also doesn't mean that you need to be limited in what you can do, and that the pain and the symptoms themselves need to control your life. And so this is the type of pain care that I work with my patients on.
What do you tell to somebody who says, well, I've been told I'll be in pain for the rest of my life?
I tell them that, our mind can actually create our own reality. I think there's something very powerful about changing the way we think to change the way we feel. And so whether or not the reality is that you will, experience some form of pain for the rest of your life, it doesn't mean you need to suffer from pain for the rest of your life. And there's a difference there, right? A feeling and being able to take an experience and put it in a box and let that experience be a passenger in your life versus let that feeling and experience control your life. And I think that's the difference between having pain and suffering from pain. And that's an important distinction, which I try to relay to my patients. I also tell them, don't be negative. If you believe you can, harm, then believe you can heal. If you believe, and we can change the way we feel by changing the way we think.
By changing the way, what did you say? What was the last statement?
We can change the way we feel by changing the way we think. So if we think positively that there is an end to this suffering and symptoms, we can create a reality where there is an end to these suffering and symptoms. If we believe that we cannot, if we believe that there is no end to the suffering and symptoms, we have created a limitation in our mind, and healing is a lot more difficult if you kind of create this negative reality.
Very interesting. Just Tuesday, I was working with a client who is rehabilitating from injury, and she was being very negative about her body. Oh, I'm moving like an old lady, that type of talk. And I said, you should be aware of the self-talk that's going on, because that self-talk is what you believe is what comes out. So if you believe you will never recover, if you believe the pain will never go away, the pain will likely not go away. So let's change the self-talk and the quiet voice
Yes.
behind what's going on. And today I saw her and I said, how is the self-talk? She's like, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But it's very much of a mindset thing as well. And
Yeah.
let's talk about pain and movement. Because in my observation, what most people do when they're in pain, they say, I cannot move because I'm in pain. And therefore, I will stop moving. And a lot of what I do is educating them that that's the worst thing you can do for your body.
Sure. I definitely want to talk about movement as a form of medicine. Before that, though, I want to just comment on, the last thing you said about negative self-talk. And you're the patient, the person that you were working with who was working on their own negative self-talk. We are our own worst critics. And so it is very difficult to get down on ourselves. One of the therapies and treatments that I talk to my patients about is taking yourself out of your own reality for a minute and imagining there is another person who is exactly like you in the exact same situation and is coming to you for advice. What would you tell them, right? I'm never going to get better. Your neighbor, let's say you're dealing with chronic knee pain and you're feeling really down about it and you don't think you're ever going to, do the things you love again and be able to walk and hike and whatever it is that you enjoy doing with the ability to walk. And, in your mind, we have these a lot of negative self-talk and sort of negative automatic thinking, right? I have knee pain, therefore I will never be able to walk the same way again. Therefore, I may be in a wheelchair, and then how am I going to work? And how am I going to get around? And how am I going to get into my house with stairs? So this sort of negative downward spiral. So what we try to do is actually have a person come out of their own reality and create a scenario where they're talking to somebody else in the same situation. And I promise you, you're not going to tell your friend that they should be down on themselves, that they're never going to get better. They might as well just give up. Life is going to be terrible for forever, right? You're not going to do that. You're going to say, listen, you have another healthy leg. In the worst case scenario, we'll get you a cane, maybe a walker. If I have to, I'll carry you. Let's not let these symptoms limit your life. You're going to be okay. And people love you. People are going to take care of you. And so sometimes taking yourself out of the situation and imagining it somebody else can be super, super helpful and powerful.
I tell people, would you ever say what you say to yourself to your best friend?
That's right.
And people are like, no. And I'm like, well, you kind of need to befriend yourself and become your best friend so you can change to a positive talk.
That's right. And that's a very nice, concise way of saying what I tried to say in a few minutes. So excellent. To touch on your second point about movement and pain, we definitely know that movement is medicine. When we talk about motion in chronic pain care, we talk about motion being lotion for the body, and how actually moving the body itself can help heal different areas. Now, we know that if you have arthritis, for example, not moving a joint that has arthritis can lead to a frozen joint. So let's talk about a shoulder, or adhesions in the knee, or other areas in the hands, for example, trigger finger. And so therapy that focuses on movement is very important. Now, a lot of people say to me, well, but I'm in too much pain. What I try to explain is that nobody knows your own body better than yourself, right? And so we can define the limitations of movement. There is a stark difference in our mind between movement that is dangerous and movement that is uncomfortable. And so I discourage any type of movement that feels dangerous. Movement that is uncomfortable initially generally becomes more comfortable as we continue to do it. And so I think about, running or going on a treadmill, right? You got to start off slow. You can't just hit it, to 9 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour from day one. but sort of this slow, gradual movement, even if it's a little uncomfortable, that's okay. If it's dangerous, I tell people.
Yeah, I tell people you have to crawl before you can run a marathon, right? Because sometimes in the context of fitness, I think what a lot of people envision in their head is I have to go do a boot camp class and I can barely move. And to the point you made is no, just start by slowly walking, walk around the cul-de-sac, walk to the mailbox multiple times a day, right? Till your body starts strengthening. And something interesting else I observe, I'll be curious for your comment, is people are shocked how fast their body strengthens. And they're like, wow, I couldn't do this a couple of weeks ago. And now look, and that also starts changing their mindset and the talk that's happening into their mind, because they start becoming more positive. They start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And then it starts feeding them into, I want to do more because I can enjoy life now more rather than be stuck in pain.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's especially true with low impact, high intensity aerobics. We know that if you practice activities like running on a treadmill or swimming, for example, so low impact to the joints, but very high intensity, and it's aerobic. So it really gets the heart rate pumping. We know that those types of activities can improve our mood, and they start to secrete endorphins, which are natural pain relievers in our body. And so our perception, our mood is not only is our pain improved, but also our mood is improved, right? And this all happens from exercise.
Yeah, yeah. What is your comment as far as the other dimensions of pain? So we talked a little bit about emotion, mental. Can you talk a little bit about those two aspects rather than just the physical aspect of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you think about chronic pain, you need to break it down into three parts: the biological, the psychological, and then the social impacts of chronic pain. We know that the symptom of pain can affect our body. So let's take knee pain, for example. You're experiencing the pain in your knee. Now, when pain chronifies, so after the acute phase, it can start to affect our mood. It can lead us down, again, these negative downward spirals, negative self-talk. People who suffer from chronic pain are 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. There is a higher risk of suicide in this patient population. And so there is a very intimate connection between chronic pain and mental health disorders. Now, that's not to say that a mental health disorder is the cause of chronic pain. We know that pain can affect the mood. We also know that certain mental health conditions can actually manifest in the form of chronic pain. And so it doesn't actually matter what comes first.
The chicken or the egg?
It doesn't matter. The most important point is that we actually need to focus on both sides, right? We can't just manage. If we want to succeed in treating somebody with chronic pain syndrome, where the pain has already affected their mood, it's important for us to treat their mood and also treat their biology, the physical aspects of pain. And I've seen this in my clinic when I was at Montefiore treating people in person. I'd have, chronic pain sufferers who have very focal pain. I have knee pain, and I would take a needle and inject them with lidocaine, a numbing medicine, which has to take away the biological symptoms. But when they walk out, they're still down. And I said, "Are you in pain?" They said, "No." So what's going on? Well, I'm still suffering, right? And so there's more than just pain. Now, this isn't true for everybody, but if it's present, we need to recognize it and manage it. Now, there's a third component, which I also want to touch upon, which is the impact that the symptoms can have on a person's social well-being, which is critical. Pain can create sort of limitations and barriers in how we move and interact. We spoke about fear earlier. Avoidance of certain activities that we enjoy, that can affect our social, right? If I'm a tennis player and I have knee pain, I no longer want to play tennis. If tennis was a place where I had, a lot of social interactions and connection, there's a major impact on the person's social well-being. Let's talk about work. You're in pain, you can't work. think about what that does to your sort of social life, right? It decreases the amount, your income earning potential, your interactions, social interactions at the office. Pain can also feel very isolating, right? Nobody, it's invisible. Not every chronic pain sufferer walks around with a cane or crutches or a cast on them. Chronic pain can be invisible. And so when you go to work and you say, I got to leave early, my back pain, I have severe, terrible back pain. You can imagine that your colleague is probably saying, come on, the back pain again, right? And so it is extremely isolating. It is difficult for people who aren't in your situation to understand it. And it can have a very significant impact on your social well-being. So coaching a person on, positive, social connections and positive social connections, I think is really important part of the management of chronic pain. Don't let the symptoms limit your ability to do the things you love.
Yeah. Dr. Jacob, what do you tell to somebody, because this is something else I do a lot of re-education around, is especially in the context of exercise, pushing through the pain. So that's the other extreme, right? Some people don't want to move because they have pain, but then you have others who are in pain and they're like, well, I'm just going to push through.
Again, I think you need to draw a distinction. If we're dealing with chronic, obviously acute pain is different, right? If you have a broken bone, I don't recommend pushing through the pain. If you have an acute injury, seek medical care, get an x-ray. When it comes to chronic pain, I think I'll say what I said about exercise and motion. You should distinguish between a dangerous pain and a pain that is uncomfortable. I think it's okay to test your limits when it comes to uncomfortable pain, when it comes to pain that feels dangerous, and be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. And if it doesn't feel dangerous, but it's uncomfortable, then, push yourself a little bit. I think that's okay.
I think what I see a lot is the pushing into the dangerous direction. Like I had a client yesterday, she shared she has neck issues, and she said she used to do exercises and she's like, I could feel my pain, my neck was hurting. And she's like, but I only had 3 more reps. So she's like, I'm just going to push through that. She's like, I did another one and it hurt even more. And she's like, by the time I finished, she's like, I could barely move.
Yeah, like, that sounds like, again, an acute pain issue, which I would avoid. I talk to myself about this when I'm on the treadmill. If I start to feel my ankle twinging even a little bit, that's an acute injury. I'll tone down the treadmill speed, because could be the beginning of a much bigger problem, which I want to avoid, right? Yes. We're dealing with chronic pain. If a person has chronic neck pain, and they're stretching, and the stretching feels uncomfortable, right? But they want to hold the stretch for an additional 30 seconds. As long as it doesn't feel dangerous, I do think that it's reasonable to encourage a person to push their limits, push their limits a little bit. Of course, when it gets dangerous, then be your own judge.
And that's another big piece of creating that self-awareness, because sometimes people will say, oh, I feel that. And I'll say, is it pain? Or are we activating a muscle that you're not used to using and now it's kicking in? And they'll be like, I don't know. So I'll ask them a couple of follow-up questions and I'll tell them, if we're waking up a muscle that has been dormant because it has checked out, we do want that. If you feel like it's painful and it's gonna now pull into your neck or whatever, then we do not want that. But creating that awareness of what are you experiencing in your body, I don't think we're raised to pay attention to our body and the signals that it gives us in the context of moving, for example.
Yeah, that's true. And also, it's very true when it comes to pain. Pain is a learned behavior. We're actually not born knowing what pain is. Pain is something that we experience, and the way we react to pain is a function of the environment that we're in. I see this with my 15-month daughter. If she falls and hits herself, and I stay calm, and I come over to her and give her a kiss and smile, she doesn't cry and get very emotional. And if I don't control my reaction to the symptoms, then she doesn't control her reaction to the symptoms. And so I've actually, over the last 16 months, been able to watch a person learn.
Experiment firsthand.
and and it's pretty amazing. And so every person's perception of pain and their experience of pain is different. It's a very unique problem, which is, difficult it creates challenges in our field, right? If everyone experiences pain differently, then how do we measure it? And so how do we generalize pain for research purposes? So there's, obviously it's one of the difficulties, but it's also something that's super unique and interesting about chronic pain, which is the way our perception is our reality when it comes to pain.
Yeah.
So what you may think pain is, another person may not think pain is. And now, that doesn't mean that we should trivialize another person's experience. We need to register it and respect another person's experience and journey. So I have a lot of patients who come to my office and they say, no doctor can ever find out what's wrong with me. People are telling me that it's all in my head. And one of the things that we need to do to reassure a person is that regardless of where the symptoms are coming from, the bottom line is you are experiencing pain, and nobody can tell you that you're not, because that is a uniquely personal experience, right? Nobody can tell me if I'm happy or sad. Nobody can tell me and it's the same with pain. Nobody can tell you what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't care what the MRI shows. I don't care what the X-ray shows. I don't care. If you're in pain, we need to manage that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because, it's the same thing with movement. There are certain movement that's, let's say if somebody has chronic back pain, there are certain rules of exercises to avoid. But what I always tell people is, you and I can have the same injury and you might be able to do something and not have pain, and I might not be able to get anywhere close to doing it and be in pain. So to your point, the experience is very different, and we just adjust the movement to your body and what you're experiencing in your body. That's why we laugh with my clients. I tell them, I'm going to ask you 500 times in the next hour, how's your body feeling? How's your body feeling? What are you experiencing? Because I need your body's feedback to what we're doing. How does it feel for you?
So what a lot of my patients tell me is that physical therapy actually makes their pain worse. And that's very possible. And I think one of the reasons for that is because when someone else is doing therapy on you or assisting you, you might actually push yourself to a place that you don't necessarily feel safe in. So the flip side of this is home exercise. Home exercise is super effective because we can define our own limitations. We get to decide what exercises are comfortable versus what exercises are uncomfortable and too painful. So I think that physical therapy is super important for teaching a person how to move their body in the correct ways to help them heal. But the real work is in the home exercise program. It's taking what you have from the therapy back home and then deciding what your own limitations are and figuring out what that means for you.
And from my experience, the one thing I do with people, especially post-injury, when they're rehabilitating, and like you said, maybe they've had a knee replacement, right? So if they have been avoiding that site and now we need to activate that site and put it back into action, is sometimes it will be uncomfortable, right? Because you got to push the body just a little bit past so that it can start regaining back that strength. But once again, I need their feedback for, is that too much? Is that just enough? And then also a lot of my clients who I'm helping with rehab is they're surprised that we're doing really little things. And I'm like, those little things you take home, and maybe it's mobilizing your foot and getting mobility into your foot or anything like that. But it's small steps that lead to big changes.
Right.
Yeah. Dr. Jacob, we can't finish without me asking you, what's your definition of rebellious?
So rebellious. I think when someone who can take a look at a situation and they aren't afraid to challenge the status quo. I think that really is rebellious. I think, in human nature, we tend to take the path of least resistance, even if that path makes absolutely no sense. And I think medicine is actually a very good example of this. There's a lot of what we call sacred cows in medicine, a lot of these practices that we hold sacred that should never change, that we believe that they can never change. And so I think being able to, and this is true in many other, areas of life, not just medicine, but kind of being able to take a look at the status quo and then challenging it, even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. To me, that is what rebellious is.
I like that. All right, let's see. 2 more questions. One is, any favorite quote or words of inspiration you have for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. The mind is the most incredible gift we have. And I think if we use it properly, anything is possible. We can change by changing the way we think, we can change the way we feel. And our limitations are really our own mind's creation. If you challenge and remove these limitations, then really anything is possible.
I like that. And Dr. Jacob, where can people follow you and find you?
You can find our website, that's clearing.com. We have a virtual telehealth clinic where we treat chronic pain sufferers across the country in 11 states. You can also find me on LinkedIn or on Instagram at Dr. Jacob Pain. So it's Dr. Jacob, Jacob, Pain, Pain.
Very good. Dr. Jacob, I appreciate your time with us here today. Thank you so much for all the insight, and totally enjoyed our conversation. And I do hope our listeners enjoyed that as well. I wish you continued success. And for all of you listening, thanks so much for tuning in, and remember to make it a rebellious day. Can't get enough of those rebellious conversations? Do make sure you subscribe, like, and share with your friends.